Okay, today we are starting with what I'm assigning you tonight, the homework for tonight. It's the second day of 8.4, and so I'm in the middle of that file here, or actually near the end of that file, last 4 or 5 pages, and it says day 2, and it's bright yellow like this. All right, so the ones that are circled there, we're going to do. The ones that are crossed off, we're not going to do. So you can cross off 7 and 8. It's not like they're incredibly hard. It's just you probably don't need that much practice. Okay, trying to keep the assignment to that 20 to 30 minute zone. Okay, the next page. On this one, I'm going to have you skip number 28. A little hint for look at number 15 for a second. Do you remember me saying you will never solve them if you have 2 logs on one side? So you condense those. You put them down, make it into 1 log. All right. Look at number 27. Do you remember me saying that when you have an inequality symbol like this, what should that make you think of? You can't do this problem without a number line. It's like the tip of a number line. So that means I'm trying to find spots on my number line, and then I got to test regions around those spots. So where are those spots on the number line? Well, that is what you're going to need to solve this for. So you act like it says equals, and you act like you're just solving this as an equals, but then when you're done, your answers are 2 spots on the number line, and you have to take it from there. Okay? Now this one's not super hard. It's an example of getting the clump, which is right here, alone. And then, once you get the clump alone, what's the number 1 strategy out of the 6 that I've told you? Rewrite. And I'm going to go through those strategies for just in a moment after I tell you the rest of the things that you're assigned here. Okay, then you're going to do number 33. Notice again, it's got a greater than sign. It says use a calculator. I don't want you to because there's no calcs in this next test anyway. And if you did, you just graph both sides, see where they cross. But that would just tell you the spot, and then you'd have to figure out where to shade, bigger or smaller. Okay, but you can figure out the spot that goes on the number line. Why a number line? Because it's got the inequality sign. And how do I find the spot? Act like it just says equals and solve it. And I would recommend step number 1 is always check if you can rewrite it. And I think you might be able to in this case. All right. So, and also, if it has an ln, you always write that as a log base e, and almost always you'll need that base, and you do, because that's how you're gonna rewrite it. Is you're gonna start with that base and then go over here, etc. All right, so crossing off 34 if you haven't already. On to the last couple pages here. Number 36, yes, we're gonna skip number 37. That one's just a little intense. We're gonna do an inverse today in class, and I'll talk about that. And then the very last problem, number 15, only the 2 that are circled. You may skip F as in Frankfurter. It's gone. Okay? Those are the ones I want you to do for tonight. Any questions, any repeats needed? Make it fast if you're gonna. Okay then, here are some strategies that I have told you about before. If you ever see something squared, and then that same thing again, except it's not squared, do you get that that's setting up to be a quadratic? If you have something squared plus something not squared, so here's that thing, and here's that thing, something squared, something not squared, let's say -3, for example. Once you get that quadratic set equal to 0, it's a piece of cake, right? So just notice, look for things that are squared, because a lot of times then, that's a great time to use substitute. Number 1 strategy is a rewrite. But if you've got something squared, use substitution is a great one. Changing to common bases. Another huge strategy. Another strategy, if you have logs, you have to condense. You're either adding them or dividing them or subtracting them or whatever. You have to get 2 logs down to 1. And you can also put things, take logs out of an equation or put logs in. Another thought, if you see a number like log base 3 of x plus 4 equals 7. That could be a log. It's not hard to make it a log. Remember how to do that? How do you get that into a log? Well, you times it by log base, use the same base, 3 of 3. And this is important. You don't want to then cancel the logs right away because this 7 times 3 is not right. Where should you have put that 7 before? Hold on just a second here. Whoa. I'm going to just move it up like that. Sorry. Where should you have put that 7 before you canceled up on the 3? Then you can get the logs off both sides. Okay. That was make a constant into a log, number 4. Number 5, u substitution. Again, u substitution, let u equal ln x, or let u equal e to the x. Those are common ones, okay? And that's where you got something that's been squared and something that's not squared but is like times by something, then you can tell that that one is begging to be turned into a quadratic like this. So look for something squared. That's a sign that's probably a u substitution type question. All right, and the last one is if you have a bunch of stuff next to your log, then your first step would be to get the clump alone. This is the clump. And if I need to get that alone, I'd have to get rid of a few things. You'd start by subtracting 8, then you'd divide by -2, and then you can start thinking about rewriting or making common bases, or put in a log on each side, or multiply just one of the sides. Like if I wanted to, I could make this times by log base 3 of 3. I'm not saying that's a smart idea in this case. I'm just saying anytime you want to, you can times by 1, and that's really just equal to 1. Then that 12 would need to go up onto the 3 again. That's not what I would do in this case, because first I would want to get the clump alone. Okay, so there's a summary of a bunch of strategies that'll help you. And now your job is to answer a few questions with a partner. And I've got this stored on Schoology. Okay, it's a little quiz. And it's going to look like this. Chapter 8 practice quiz. And I don't want to give you any help on these. I just gave you a bunch of help. Find this quiz that says in-class quiz under Schoology. And you're going to have a partner. And these are challenging questions you'll need to talk through. Okay, when you're done with them, you can start your homework. Oh, one more thing. Before we start this quiz, there is a question about inverses. And I want to do a 2-second reminder about how to do an inverse. Do not start your quiz. You want to be with me on this one. Otherwise, you'll be lost on the inverse question, and your friend will have to help you. Okay, pay attention. Let's say we had y equals 3x minus 7. What's the inverse? Do you remember inverses? Anything about inverses? Just tell me stuff you remember. Yes? You switch the x and the y. Good. So the domain becomes the range. Range becomes the domain. Okay, so when we get this all simplified down and we got a new answer for it, that'll be the inverse. Do you remember that domain and range for that actually come from the domain and range of this? So you find this guy's domain and this guy's range first. And then you can go and flip-flop them and get the answer that way. I'm going to change this to like squared because make it just a little more challenging. Now, do you get that that's a parabola that has been stretched and moved down? Get what I'm saying? Now, once you have the little picture of it, isn't it pretty easy to say it's domain and range? Domain is all reals because it goes this way and this way for domain. That's all reals. And its range would be not all reals. It goes from -7 to infinity. So once you have the picture, it's a piece of cake. Okay, now what's the domain and range of the inverse? You just switch them. the inverse that we get down here, it's called f negative 1 of x. The inverse is domain and range. The domain becomes the range, so this one's all reals. And the range becomes the domain, and that's from -7 to infinity. Okay, but what about this finding the inverse thing? You told me correctly that I'm supposed to switch x and y. So I'm going to say x equals 3y squared minus 1, or minus 7, and then you would solve that. I'm going to go to a simpler one again. Everybody, please find me the inverse of that. We already had a test on inverses. This is just a review because you're about to do an inverse of a log. I just flip-flop the x and the y. ML, what do you think is the next step? Guy in the back corner. I'm not saying names, I'm just saying words of add 4 to both sides. All right, next step of divide by 5. There's 2 ways to do it. Just one big divide by bar, but that gets a little messy because then what you're left with over here, it's really hard to tell like what's the slope and what's the y-intercept. So I like to divide by 5 on all 3 parts. That's my preferred way of doing it. Divide 5, divide 5, divide 5. Final answer, y equals 1/5 x, or x over 5, plus 4/5. Raise your hand if you had that one right. Good. Now, do you get what would be wrong right now? If I said, okay, so now I need its domain and its range. So now I'm going to graph it. And what's wrong? I can't do that. That will mess me up. To find the domain and range of this, I need to find the domain and range of the original one, not this one. Don't graph this one. That's the inverse, but don't graph it. Go to the original, this guy, and get its domain and range. Starts here, has a really steep slope. What's this domain and range? Well, actually, in this case, it's all reals and all reals, so that's going to be really easy. Okay, but you get trapped a lot of times when people think they should just take the inverse's domain and range directly. You cannot. Okay, now you know everything that you need to know to be able to do well on that quiz. Get that quiz out, and you were partnered with somebody yesterday. I'll tell you about partners for today after I end the video here right about now.